Our first panelist is Dr. Duana Welch. She is, on a personal note, a former colleague. She taught with us in the Department of Psychology at ACC before she moved away to Oregon. And she's joining us from Eugene, Oregon. She will be on Zoom soon. In the meantime, I'll introduce her. She's a dating coach and an author known for using science rather than opinion to help men and women find and keep the love of their lives. Her Love Factually books are endorsed by relationship scientists such as Dr. John Gottman, David Buss, Terry Orbach. She has contributed to PBS, NPR, Psychology Today, and is an expert for the science-based couples app Paired. And you can learn more about her on her website. She also has a couple of, maybe more than two, recordings because she's done sessions for us. She's done workshops for us. So if you go to our website, you can find your way to some of her previous talks. Thank you, Duana. I don't know if you can see me, but can you hear me?
I do. It's so good to see you again. It's good to be back at ACC, even virtually.
Good to see you too. Do you see me better if I face this way or this way?
The other way.
This?
Yes, please.
Okay. Lovely to see your face. Okay. Second panelist, Dr. Karen Rain. Will you join us here? Thank you. Dr. Karen Rain is the Executive Director of Unhushed, an organization dedicated to creating and implementing the highest quality sexuality education curricula possible. She's also an assistant professor of instruction in the Educational Psychology Department at the University of Texas. She's the author of books like Girl, Love, Sex, Romance, and Being You, Trans Plus, Love, Sex, Romance, and Being You, and Breaking the Hush Factor, 10 Rules for Talking with Teenagers About Sex, as well as a wide range of curricula and other professional resources. Karen lives in the Hill Country outside Austin with her wife, 3 children, and her standard poodle. On a personal note, Karen is a former student of mine, and I take credit for everything she's done. She's also a former faculty member, adjunct faculty member in our own department of psychology at ACC. It is it's such an honor to have her here. And last, but certainly not least, Geeti Mahajan is a certified yoga therapist, energy healer, and licensed clinical social worker. Geeti specializes in trauma and has worked in medical facilities such as psychiatric inpatient hospitals and primary care settings since 2012. Geeti created Utopia Healing Arts in 2022 to offer an array of healing services that may not be found in a typical medical setting. And you can connect with Geeti at utopiahealingarts.com. On another personal note, Geeti she's a peace builder. When she was an undergraduate at UT, she volunteered as I was developing this Iranian folk dancing class for an after-school program at my daughter's public elementary school, a free dance class. And Geeti volunteered and taught them dance. And here we are working together. And George, you're not done. You're a discussant here. You can stay there, yes. All right, I'm going to turn it over to the two of you, and I'll bring you another mic. But I think we're going with Duana first. All right, you're on.
Hi. So I've chosen to entitle this Fighting for Your Relationship, even though it's Peace Studies, because it turns out that conflict is a very, very important part of peace in your home. And peace in the home, I think, contributes to peace in the world. Crisis and opportunity in some cultures really mean the same thing. And we know from research by Dr. Terry Orbach in her 25 years longitudinal study called The Early Years of Marriage, which it's not the early years of marriage after 25 years, but when she first got the grant, it looked like it was just going to be the early years. She asked many, many questions of married couples, hundreds of married couples. And she found that among those who said they never fought, 100% of them divorced. So one of the things that's a big idea is that within relationships, conflict is absolutely necessary, but it does matter what kind of conflict you have. So if you do it right, it builds connection. And there's a book out just new, I really recommend it, called Fight Right, by the people who probably know the most about successful intimate relationships from the standpoint of science of anybody in the world, Dr. Julie Schwartz Gottman and Dr. John Gottman. And one of the big ideas here, I loved that George pointed out that there's a 4-to-1 ratio of more women than men in peace studies. One of their big ideas is that women's anger is actually really important in relationships. Now, again, anger is not necessarily a bad thing. What we do with it can make it good or bad. But the reason that women's anger is so important is that most places, most of the time, most of the issues that get brought up by women. And when women don't bring up issues, the relationship actually suffers a lot. Obviously, there are lesbian relationships and gay relationships and all kinds of relationships. So what I'm saying is in heterosexual relationships, it's usually a woman who brings up the issue. In relationships that are same sex, maybe there isn't a woman or maybe there are two, but usually it's a woman in any relationship with a woman that is bringing up the issues. So I've coined the term relationship mechanic to describe what women are doing that is so important. And importantly, we do it from the very start. One of the things that Dr. John Gottman thought was that the happiest relationships, they don't really argue much. And in his longitudinal study of greater than 35 years duration, what he found was in really happy relationships that last and last happily, if there's a woman in the relationship, she or they bring up conflict more often rather than less often early in the relationship. So, how is this done? I'd like to start by addressing some facts, and then I'm going to give you the antidote for each fact. The first 120 seconds of a fight predict whether you're together 6 years later. John Gottman went to MIT for his master's in mathematics before he entered psychology to get his PhD, then became a therapist, then discovered that he really didn't think the therapy he was doing with couples was helping them at all, then did a study proving that, yeah, he wasn't helping them, and then went about discovering what do happy couples do? Maybe it's different from just the opposite of what unhappy couples do. He was very right about that. And what they mean by the first 120 seconds of the fight predicting whether you're together 6 years later is that in those first minutes of the fight, a pattern is developed that either succeeds or doesn't succeed in bringing a couple closer together. So what I'm going to describe is the pattern that's helpful. Number one, the 5-to-1 rule is real. And what that means is, I don't know how many of you have ever seen any work by Dr. John Gottman. He's in the media all the time, and commonly he's quoted as having said, you need 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction for your relationship to survive happily. And that's actually not true. If you want to be happy, there's a different ratio when you're not fighting. The 5-to-1 ratio is in the middle of an argument. You need 5 times as many positive interactions as negative interactions. That's right, in the middle of the fight and from the beginning of it. And he says, don't keep a score sheet. Don't whip out a tablet and say, okay, that was 1 positive, 2 positives. You'll know when it dips below 5-to-1 because it will feel really bad to you. Emotionally, it will feel terrible. Number 2, conflicts end on the same note they begin on 97% of the time. What this means is if a conflict begins with an attack, it's going to end largely on that same note, and things will actually be worse. But there are ways to begin a conflict that actually further the relationship, and we'll get into that in a moment. Tying into that is that criticism never helps. I used to teach this information when I taught at ACC and other institutions, and I would always have someone say, "Really? Never?" And it doesn't. It never helps. We'll go into why complaining is very helpful. Absolutely. The happiest couples complain the most, but criticism makes things worse 100% of the time. And in social science, we don't have many times where we've got 100% of the time versus, normally we don't have 100% of the time. A lot of times we're happy with 10, 15, 20%. So that's a very significant thing to be able to say, that it never helps. It always makes things worse. And finally, most of your problems with a partner, no matter what kind of partnership you're in, most of your problems will never be solved. They just won't be. And we will get into why that is and why that's good news for you. So taking these in turn, build your bank account. The number one thing about fighting really isn't about fighting. It's about building your bank account so that when arguments inevitably happen, and they should happen, you're fine-tuning your relationship. They should happen. But when they happen, you want to have a strong bank account. And I called it the bank of love and trust. In the bank of love and trust, you actually, for every $1 you put in, it's not like a regular bank where you can take $1 out. In this bank, you have to put $20 in for every $1 you take out. And the 20 things are really small. I was meeting with someone recently who said, well, we go on big vacations and that's when we connect, which is great, except that most of us maybe can't afford big vacations. And even if we can't, real living happens in the small moments of life. And you want a ratio of 20 of these small moments that are positive to any of these small moments that feel bad to you. So these are really, really little things. But what they amount to is turning towards your partner at least 80% of the time. You don't have to be perfect. But again, John Gottman is a mathematician before he was a social scientist. And so he knows what that number is. It's 80% or more of the time. When your partner makes what's called a bid for your attention, you want to make sure that you are responding positively. So if they say, "Oh, there's a bird, look at that bird out there," and you say, that totally counts. It doesn't mean you have to stop everything you're doing. But if you ignore what they said, which is turning away from, or if you say, "Can't you see I'm reading? I'm trying to study for my test. Gosh, leave me alone." That's turning against. And turning away from and turning against are big predictors of relationships degrading over time. Tip number 2, start softly. Sometimes people are concerned with winning, and I want you to be concerned with winning with a capital W. Winning with a capital W means the relationship wins. It doesn't mean that I win at all costs. If people win at the cost of their partner's happiness, that's the relationship losing. And relationships have been proven to make us happier than anything else in our lives, and also to make us less happy than anything else in our lives. So it's worth doing well. So you want to start with soft words. When I was saying earlier that conflict ends on the same note it begins on 97% of the time, good relationship mechanics, no matter what their gender is, good relationship mechanics tend to enter the discussion, because really, if you use soft words, it's less like a fight and more like a discussion. They tend to enter that with soft words. For example, they might say, "I'm upset because I'm really tired tonight. I thought you were going to do the dishes. They're still in the sink. Could you please do them?" Or, "I get it that you don't like to go out with my friends, but I really miss you when we don't go out together. And I'm going out with my friends tonight. I really wish you would come with me tonight. Those are soft ways to enter a discussion. And it goes directly into tip number 3. Complain, don't criticize. If you build your feelings vocabulary, this gets much easier. I'm sure this is going to be somewhere for you to access later, but I have created a list of feelings, and there are several other resources online. If you just look up feelings words or feelings vocabulary, you'll find them. You want to be able to precisely name what you're feeling and focus on how you are feeling, not on how they are failing you. If you have a hard time really identifying how to have these discussions, because very few of us were really raised with this modeling. Again, I think it would be a much better world if we were. But if you focus on your feelings and your needs, yours, not theirs, here and now, then the relationship is very likely to thrive. I felt upset when I came home and the dishes still weren't done. I'm really tired and I really need you to do them as soon as you can. Could you do them now? Now, that's a very discrete event. It gets harder when it's a protracted issue, but it will be the same general feel. So, this leads into fight tip number 4. Most of the reason that you're not going to solve all your problems is because most of your problems with a partner are based on personality differences. And personality differences tend to be quite stable over time. One of the things Dr. Gottman said to a group of therapists was if he could give people the best possible advice, it wouldn't actually be about marriage, it would be about dating. He actually endorsed my books because of this. It would be about dating. And what he says is pick a partner whose differences and problems you can withstand forever, because you will be doing that as long as the relationship lasts. It's not every problem. There are some that are solvable, but 2/3, actually 69%, are not solvable. Every problem, he used to have a list that was published of every problem he had seen in therapy, and every problem, he got rid of the list because it overwhelmed people. Every problem began with the same word, differences. So, one of the differences that I see sometimes when I'm seeing clients is, as I alluded to earlier, one person is very extroverted and the other person is introverted. This doesn't mean the other person is shy, but the other person gets energy from spending a lot of alone time and needs to recharge after time with friends and family. And so this other partner, the introverted partner, finds it taxing to go out. And the extroverted partner might find it taxing to stay in all the time. And yet these couples can absolutely thrive. That's because they accept that they are different. Different doesn't mean that they're bad for each other or bad partners, but it means that they're going to have to negotiate and focus on this specific day or this specific situation. Solve for the moment. That's what it's called, solving for the moment, instead of solving for the rest of your life. You can't have the discussion where you just say, hey, how about if you just do it my way forever? And I think that's why, whenever my husband and I are having a discussion, it can be really tempting to think, if only they would change. But the problem is, of course, when I think, if only I would change, then I see how hard that would be. Change
Duana,
is difficult.
I'm sorry, Duana, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So sorry to interrupt. You are almost out of time.
Oh, yes, I'm almost done.
Okay, perfect time.
Yes. So focus on this specific moment. So, for example, what that might look like is, I understand you're really tired and that you would rather recharge and spend this evening at home. And so how about if we go out with friends next weekend? Now, that would give your partner time to, if your partner is introverted, that would give your partner time to kind of expect that this was coming up, save some energy for that, and the two of you to have a weekend that you can craft for the two of you so that both people get their needs met, even though nobody changed their personality. So with that said, you can contact me. I answer all my emails, DWAY-nah@lovesciencemedia.com. You can see my website. I think I've got over 100 podcast hours on there and hundreds of articles, lots of stuff for free that you can learn about relationships and enhance your own relational life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Duana. We will have time for Q&A of all of the presenters, panelists at the end. Karen, thank you. You're on.
I'm going to stand up. It's just so much easier to talk when I'm walking. All right. I'm actually going to go a little off script. I had a really hard time putting this PowerPoint presentation together, and I wasn't sure why. And I've been sitting with it for days now. Here we are. It's today. It's right now. But I think I figured it out in the last 20 minutes of sitting in this room. I think that our lovely keynote, which was amazing, and then our talk from Duana, it was about, we are all in this together. There was an assumption of we are the in-group that we are talking about. That's not necessarily the case here, and it's one of the struggles that I have when I talk about sexual orientation and gender identity and expression, which is what SOGI stands for, incidentally. I was going to go into that. There are slides. So I want to start with this. If you actively identify in yourself with the sex you were assigned at birth, and as a heterosexual or almost exclusively heterosexual person, could you just give me a wave? Okay, let's look around. That's most of the people in this room. So I'm here to talk about what it means to be in queer or SOGI or LGBTQIA+ relationships to a bunch of people who mostly don't identify that way. Now, when I'm talking to folks who are mostly in the in-group, right, when I'm talking to affinity groups, hello, it's really different, right? What I would get up here and say about maintaining strong relationships in that context, there's a lot of things I don't need to explain. But when I'm talking mostly to folks who don't have this lived experience, how much do I explain? And where am I leaving behind the folks who didn't raise their hands? Right? For those people to have me stand up here and go, look, y'all, Texas sucks. Being queer in Texas right now is hella hard. And to give statistics about why that is, and to give statistics on depression and suicidality, that just makes things worse for those of us who identify in those ways. So coming up here and trying to explain some of the ways that it's hard ends up hurting the folks who I'm trying to help. And anyway, it's just really hard. Doing a talk like this is really hard. And figuring out a way to speak to each of you and be able to say, look, here's how we can acknowledge the difficulties and celebrate the beauties of SOGI or queer relationships, LGBTQIA. The language is always evolving, and where you are in the world really impacts what you're going to say and what kind of language you're going to use. And I work a lot in the international space, and Texas is not as bad as a lot of places to be queer. Absolutely. But it is nevertheless scary. Having on my bio that I'm gay, standing up in front of people not in this setting, I'm going to be real. Like, I didn't come here today like worried that I was going to be in any way either verbally or even emotionally harmed by being clear about my sexual orientation. But that's not the case in lots of places in Texas. I don't have to worry mostly about my physical safety, but I've been in places where I did. You know, my wife's name is Nicole and her nickname is Nick. And so I absolutely play with pronouns and talk about my husband, Nick, in some places, because that's the way to maintain safety. And I take my kids to Pride, you know, and we celebrate hard in our family around sexual orientation, around gender identity, around gender expression. My 7-year-old, y'all, she loves some rhinestone boots. I mean, she is the girliest person in our household. And and that is saying something, you know, and we love and we accept it. We're all in. But it's hard. It's all hard. And I think that, you know, we can maybe skip to my last slide if we wanted to. Does this work? Great. We will. What does SOGI mean? We've talked about that. Language is important. Here's a bunch of language. People don't like the word lesbian. There's some interesting research on that. If you're interested, I can send it to you. Times are tough. Here's a bunch of terrible statistics. We're going to skip that slide, but I've already told you why. And I think these slides are being made available. So if you want to know some of the hard statistics, feel free to be in touch or to get my slides. It's not all bad. There is beauty in queerness. And so this is something that I feel like when I'm talking to a bunch of folks who aren't in this in-group, what is it? What is it that we can do? I would say let's celebrate queerness. I didn't make this picture as a side note. It's a beautiful picture, though. And this is a piece of, you know, this contrary nature of really rough statistics combined with really exciting celebrations and holding that range and dichotomy of experience as a heterosexual cisgender person has so much power. What we need are folks who are loud and proud allies, people who are out there in the schools, who are wearing those rainbows, who are putting those rainbows on their windows, who are making their space safe, which is a political and professional risk in the Texas school systems. But you all, as adults, have less to risk than the children who you might be supporting. So I'm going to encourage you to make those risks, to be that person who's willing to stand up and celebrate and also hold space for the pain. So then we have, what does this mean about you? Here are like my little recommendations, your takeaways. How can you transform conflicts with the queer people in your life? This thing here at the beginning, believe people, this is like my mantra. I feel like Shireen might be getting tired of hearing me say it. But when someone tells you who they are, let's believe them. Ultimately, there's no downside in believing them when they tell you who they are. And there's a lot of upside. Might who they are change? Yes, we're going to hope so. Right? There's a lot of reason to believe that who a 13-year-old tells you they are is not going to be exactly the same for who they will tell you they are at 30 or 60. We hope that our queer youth grow and evolve in their identities and their understanding of selves in the way that we all do over time. We don't need to pigeonhole people. We just need to show up for them as they're showing up on any given day. Believe people when they tell you who they are. I feel like this would solve so many problems in our world if we could just do that. General well-being is a grind. You know, here in Texas, we queer folks don't have, a right to housing or job security. We can be fired. We can be kicked out of our homes for being queer. That sucks. I own my own home, so I'm not worried about it. But for folks who don't earn their own homes, and y'all, to be clear, I bought my house 20 years ago. Housing is crazy. I'm not sure how anybody affords to live here who didn't buy their house 20 years ago. So, general well-being is a grind. When people are grinding for daily sustenance, even if you don't see it, they can still be feeling it. And even if you don't see a reason for it, right? You look at lots of queer people, so the folks who are, employed by an inclusive supporting organization, and they have a secure house, they have friends, they have family. There is a narrative in our culture that harms queer people because we hear every day, you are not welcome in some places. So even if literally all of the places that a specific queer person goes, they are welcomed, there is a narrative in our movies, in our literature, that coming out sucks and that people are going to reject you and maybe harm you. Even when that's not our lived experience, it is the narrative of queerness. So, general well-being is a grind. And then celebration is welcome. Let's, go to Pride, go to Queer Bomb. In your life, post on social media. Make sure that you are outwardly, visibly an ally. That's it. That's all I got. I don't know where I am on time. Here's my sources from my data that were sad. So, how are we on time, Shireen?
You did great.
Perfect.
And you being with us always makes me happy. So thank you for your really important talk. All right, Giti, we really need you now.
Testing. Hello. My name is Geeti, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, a yoga therapist, and an energy healer. I work as a psychotherapist at a university counseling center, and I also see clients in my private practice. I specialize in working with survivors of trauma, and I'm also a survivor of trauma myself. And I say that because I think it's important for people to see what happens to a child when they're abused. They grow up to become a contributor to society, and that's me. I'll be sharing with you some thoughts on what it has been like, both working with this population and also healing alongside my clients, as we journey to higher levels of inner peace through acts of self-love. And we'll begin with a mindfulness activity. And the first thing that I want to just recognize is that when I woke up this morning, the first thing that I saw was that Iran was bombed. And Dr. Shireen is from Iran, my mom is from Iran. And just as a Middle Eastern person, war is in your life all the time, even if it's not knocking on your door. It's knocking on the door of the people that you love. And I just wanted to hold some space for that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do a little bit of mindfulness meditation right now in our chairs. So you can keep your feet on the ground, maintaining a tall spine. And if you'd like to dim your eyes or close your eyes, you can do that. I'm just going to ask you to tune in to the sounds in the space. Noticing the sound of my voice, any kind of white noise, and perhaps the sound of your own breath. Notice how your body breathes itself. Noticing your feet on the ground. And any kind of thoughts, feelings, emotions that are arising inside of you right now. Maybe your mind is elsewhere, but your body is here. And using your body as an anchor to bring your awareness fully here in this space. And I'm going to offer 3 words, and I want to invite you to explore your response to these 3 words. You are enough. You are enough. You are enough. Just notice, do you have any kind of reaction? Positive, negative, neutral? Notice any physical sensations in your belly, your chest, your jaw. Let's take a deep breath together. Inhale. Exhale, take your chin down towards your sternum, very gently bowing your head. And as you're ready, gently raise your gaze, look up at the screen. How many of you had a positive reaction to those 3 words? Look around. How many of you had a negative reaction to those 3 words? How many of you had a neutral reaction? Anybody want to share? You don't have to. There'll be plenty of time to share after this. I'll do all the sharing right now. So I first used this exercise working with patients in a psychiatric inpatient hospital where I worked almost a decade ago for about 4 years. People were admitted for things like self-harm, attempts to end their lives, or sometimes the lives of others. And most of the people I worked with were survivors of trauma, like myself. The exercise was designed to help people see how an interpretation of the same 3 words can be so different, person to person, and how our interpretations can influence our feelings and behaviors. This exercise helped me also see just how much pain people were carrying inside of their hearts, and how this pain led them to harm themselves or others. This exercise became part of my own exploration into self-love as a practice to rehabilitate a person's relationship with themselves, which I learned strongly influences how they would also treat others. Self-love comes from the Zen Buddhist practice of loving kindness. This refers to a mental state of unconditional kindness to other people as well as towards yourself. You may have also heard of self-compassion, which also comes from Zen Buddhism. This is a practice to address suffering, and Dr. Kristen Neff at UT Austin is one of the pioneers who's pioneered a lot of the research on self-compassion. There's much more research on self-compassion than there is on self-love. Both self-love and self-compassion are distinct from self-esteem. Self-esteem can shift, it can go up or down based on the day, based on how you feel about your hair or your accomplishments. While self-love and self-compassion are stable practices, irrespective of one's judgment of worthiness. The distinction between self-love and self-compassion may appear nuanced, but in working with people who struggle with valuing themselves, it's helpful to have as many tools available as possible. I see self-love as a practice that helps prevent suffering by building a lifestyle that centers on respect and care for oneself, like building a positive saving account of unconditional positive regard towards oneself. And I think our first speaker talked about that in relationships, so it's really not different with yourself as well. I see self-compassion as a practice to help live with suffering once a painful event occurs, to help process the pain. It may be likened to preventative care versus acute care. When working with survivors of trauma, one of the primary mechanisms that perpetuates self-hatred is shame. The shame of what happened to them, the shame they take on from others about what happened. In the literature on self-compassion, there's this notion called backdraft, which can occur when you try to just add a little bit of water to the fire inside of yourself, and then you get this backdraft of fire. So I'll give you an example. If somebody says, well, let me just give you some positive affirmations. You're awesome. And inside you're like, shut up. No, I'm not. Screw you. That's backdraft. Backdraft is a reaction when you maybe just don't trust that something positive could be said about you, or it's too scary to let something in. Think about all the times that you maybe have deflected a comment like, oh, you look great, or that was awesome, and that correspondence that you sent, or whatever it was. And there's a part of you that just might feel really hesitant about wanting to accept that in. So how do you implement self-love given the fact that many people experience backdraft or resistance to self-love? It's a lifelong practice. It's not something to be achieved or accomplished. It's a continual practice. Humanistic psychologist Duana Welch writes, love for our very selves can propel us toward growth, learning, development, and adopting self-actualization as a lifelong philosophy. So it's a way of life. And this diagram here just kind of helps demonstrate how I like to teach people about self-love. I think the authors have done a good job of basing it into 3 categories. So one is self-contact. That's simply defined as giving attention to yourself. That's what we did when we first did the You Are Enough exercise. So it's just being mindful. What is coming up inside of you? Contact, encountering your own thoughts, contact with your own feelings, your own body sensations, being aware. The second is self-acceptance, defined as being at peace with your shadow self, as much as you are at peace with your positive aspects. So this means your limitations, your aggressions, your judgments. And I use a lot of modalities like internal family systems, parts work, inner child work, EMDR. There's a lot of different modalities that therapists will use to help people to achieve more and more self-acceptance. And then self-care. This is more the actionable piece. This is a behavioral piece of setting boundaries, perhaps, with toxic relationships, toxic dynamics, being like a caretaker for yourself, much like a parent towards a child, being responsible for yourself. And another obstacle to embodying self-love is rooted in the importance of self-sacrifice. Due to social, religious, political, or cultural influences, self-love can unfortunately be interpreted as being selfish, narcissistic, and therefore being harmful to others. These interpretations create a lot of confusion in my clients who will tell me, I was raised to focus on myself, not on myself, on others, not on myself. Or it's selfish in my culture to tend to my needs. Or my gender has to be selfless. German-American psychologist Erich Fromm wrote that the phrase, don't be selfish, becomes one of the most powerful ideological weapons in suppressing spontaneity and the free development of personality. This is similar to what happens in trauma. It stifles spontaneity, according to Pia Melody, nurse and psychotherapist who's a pioneer in the field of trauma and codependency. For many survivors of trauma, the act of the trauma already signals to them that somehow they are disposable or unlovable to begin with. Societal norms emphasizing the need for self-sacrifice then signal to them that loving themselves is also selfish and therefore worthy of even more shame. So you can see the bind that it creates for somebody who's already experienced something tragic, and then to tell them that tending to themselves is actually even more of a selfish act. Fromm talks about the fact that self-love does not take away from loving others. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not a binary. Just because I love myself doesn't mean I'm harming you. Just because you love yourself doesn't mean you're harming me. In fact, one of the ways that I've found to motivate people to cultivate self-love is to connect them to the greater positive impact they have on others when they love themselves more. I always tell them that I'd rather be on a planet where people love themselves, because those people are going to be so much kinder and more pleasant to be around. And when people hate themselves, they spread that to others too. So the next time that someone treats you poorly, it is certain that they treat themselves that way too. And keeping this in mind helps me have compassion for not only that person, but also for myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we have Duana back on the Zoom screen, please? Oh, we love that picture, Duana.
Oh.
We got a peek. George, would you like to join them as the, yeah. So now we're going to open to Q&A. George can either start with a question, or if there are already burning questions in the audience, we can run the mics to you. George, would you like to start with a question?
Can I start first with how great this panel was?
Yes.
And it's great without comment from me, from what we've heard from our colleagues and friends. But also, I often hear the question, you know, I'm trying to take care of these conflicts. I'm trying to do various things. I'm trying to be a source for good. But it's a tough dynamic. And too many academics, but especially even practitioners in peace studies, say, buck up, buckaroo. You're doing good stuff. Go out there and keep going. As opposed to, have you ever thought about whether your self-love is adequate? Have you critically reflected what you need of yourself, from yourself, and owe to yourself to be something for others? And are you aware that the more in tune you are with yourself, then maybe the more sensitive and in tune you can be with others? We really failed at that maybe in pedagogy generally at the college level, but we also have failed at that in professional training for others. And that's all I'm going to say. I think this is a marvelous panel. Please ask questions of these good people.
Oh, wait. I got to bring it. I'll hold it.
Okay. More than a question, is actually a comment that I noticed. All of you have different topics, but yet all of them seem to start with self-awareness. If we would be more aware of ourselves, then we wouldn't need to have conflict. We wouldn't need to have, differences, and we would just be, in touch of the humanity that we have in ourselves. So I personally have been doing a lot of, self-work. And so I truly am always, trying to spread that. And so, yes, I invite everybody that instead of pointing the finger to, you have the problem, look oneself. Instead of trying to see the person, what they dressing, how they look how you look, because that's exactly what, Kitty, I think is your name, was saying. You know, how we see ourselves is how we see in others, but it's actually a reflection. So.
I was going to say the first presentation made me feel really great about my relationship with my husband because we just moved and there was fighting at the beginning, there was negotiation in the middle, and then there was a broken piece of furniture at the end. And it was one of those things where it's like, okay, so it's okay, it works, we're doing well. And then with the rest of the presentations, especially the final one, thinking about my brother-in-law and his relationship that's kind of ended and messy divorce. And so I suppose my question is like, when you're a person who feels really good in terms of like where they are for how they treat themselves and the relationship they're in, and then you have people in your lives that are not in that place, right? So then like, how can you, what tools can you use? Like, how can you sort of extend some grace for them, or like have a perspective that isn't just like, you know, be angry at my sister-in-law and just be like, get her out of my life. Like, cause you know, like that's the mother of your nieces and nephews. And so like, what are the things that you have, like when you're looking at self-love and self-compassion and like how you relate to a partner in a romantic relationship that you can take and extend to like different kinds of relationships that you see are not where you are and used to be, or maybe you wish could be?
I think I can answer that question. So I work with a lot of folks who really dislike queer people. And so the way that I go about that, which I don't think is very different from, you know, your mother-in-law causing a problem ultimately, right? Whatever it is. I have this little 3 steps that I encourage people to do, which is to listen, validate, and then educate. And what I tell people is that listening can take way longer than you think it would, right? You have to ask those follow-up questions. Really, tell me more about that. And do you have more you have to feel that you haven't felt like you've said yet? And then you can validate and say things like, wow, it seems like you really care about your daughter or your grandchildren or, you know, whatever. I can tell how much you care. I can tell how worried you are. And then you listen again, sometimes for hours, to get a really good like connection and relationship building moment there. And once you've gone through that process of building that dynamic, of making sure they know you are there to listen to whatever they have to say, and that they feel validated in that listening experience, then you can go to this next step of being like, hey, I would like you to know that this is how I feel. And, oh, you know, here's a thing that your grandchild experiences that you might not be aware of. But once you've done the hard work of listening and validating, then you can start talking about your perspective.
Hi. So I'm queer and polyamorous and neurospicy, and my partners are all also neurospicy. For those of you who don't know, I mean neurodivergent. We're ADHD or autistic, these things. One of my partners and I, we've been together for 26 years, since middle school. We're long distance, but when we get together, we fight like middle schoolers. And I adore this person. We've been together, you know, they're still in the closet. Yes, 26 years later. And we're going to spend a week together next week. I was curious. A point. From a standpoint of a relationship, what do you recommend when you've got 2 neurodivergent people who have a pattern of 26 years of amazing connection, but then also we just kind of grind on each other when we're together too long, in the perspective of if the other person's neurodiversity also makes them more rigid, and so it's more difficult to mix with that. Like, I'm just curious because all of you have such amazing information about loving yourself, about loving your different partners, and I want to make sure I have a fantastic week next week. So what do you guys, like, is there any advice you have for me right now?
May I take that one?
Yes.
Would you mind?
Yes.
I think Dr. Rain's advice about listening very carefully and showing compassion is perfect advice. And I would just add to that really, if you keep any discrepancy, any difference, if you keep the focus on how you are feeling and what you need instead of how your partner is failing you, you will get much, much further with your intimacy. And that's where I would leave it.
Can I add? I think you should each have like a red piece of paper, and when you feel yucky, you just hold it up. Like it stops, right? It stops the play. And it gives you a chance to like, oh, now we need to decide what to do about this red paper that's now been thrown out, right? But it'll be a marker.
Differences also just so that can make it hard, and I like that. Like, if there's a way, because if they suddenly become nonverbal because of their neurodiversity, they're getting overwhelmed. For them to be able to say, like, here's a thing that I can say, stop. Like, my neurodiversity and yours are starting to kind of on each other.
Great idea. Red cards everywhere. Take one with you. It reminds me of my daughter's Montessori preschool. They had X's with big red tape on the floor, very big X's, and anyone who needed help would go, any kid would go stand there, and somebody would come and say, how can I help you? Like, do you need a hug? So I want X marks on every floor, red cards in every hand. Yeah.
So I was wondering, how do you make sure that your own self-love doesn't extend into egoism? How do you prevent it from getting too far?
I think that's a great question. I have to think about that for a second. So I guess my first question to you is, what does egoism mean? Can you explain that?
I guess in this context, it would mean putting yourself over other people in social situations enough that it's degrading and noticeable to other people.
So I think that's a completely different definition than self-love, because I don't think that self-love means that you have to be selfish or degrading to others. I think it's just staying connected to kind of like what Dr. Duana was talking about, actually staying connected to the sensations inside of yourself and honoring and respecting kind of where you're at. And even if where you're at is angry with someone else, it's more respectful to be able to acknowledge that for yourself and also for that other person, only because that's the most truthful thing to do. So being truthful doesn't mean that you're not going to, it doesn't mean that you're going to avoid pain. You can be truthful about being upset with someone or not liking something that somebody's doing. You can make a request for that. But if you're demanding that of someone, now I think you've gone into maybe what you're calling egoism of maybe infringing on their boundaries of what they would like. But as long as you're staying centered on what feels right to you, I'm not okay with that, I don't like that, or that doesn't feel right to me. Those are all within your hula hoop. So one of my mentors would say, you have a hula hoop around you, people have a hula hoop around them, and everybody has to just stay in their hula hoop. So staying within your sphere of what's in your heart, what's from your perspective, what's coming up inside of you, so that you can really own your experience. But once you start talking about someone else's experience, like, you should be doing this differently, or, whatever it is, you've gone outside of your hula hoop and now you've entered theirs. So I hope that helps just a little bit.
Yeah, that's great.
Hi. I pulled so much out of all of your talks in terms of how to apply it to me, but it brought up a different question. I have friends who have negative self-talk, and I have friends a good friend who we've supported each other through mainly their relationship issues, and who is now, for the first time, being a trans person. And I'm just even getting my language straight. I've had friends who didn't take care of themselves during the pandemic and burnt themselves out. And Lord knows I have friends who don't fight very well. And I see how to apply what you told me to me, but how do I support them in their journeys through all of these kinds of things?
I think there's a kind of complex web here. And I think the first thing is to recognize the web of relationships you've just shared with us. And some of those pieces of the web don't connect with one another, but they all connect with you. And probably the incorrect thing is to see oneself as this, I'm the spoke in this wheel. But to think about the web is to think about what's the diversity of challenges, skills, emotions, the love I have or connection I have with these others, what does that require of me? And then this is where some of the things that our colleagues have talked about become so important. Not that I have to be singularly strong for everybody and again, that kind of thing, but how can I be honestly clear with myself and with them about the struggle, about where we are existing in this web? I think one of the skills that's required is a kind of inventory of critical self-reflection. How do I make sure I tap into why am I feeling confused, distressed, or even very satisfied by these kinds of things for the people I care about and for myself? I think the ability to do mindfulness exercises and do that is not only critical in terms of the self-love that's been talked about, but it's actually such an important skill for one's own endurance in this, because you probably want to stay there. All of us want to stay there for the long term with these people in our lives. That's probably not nearly as good an answer as I think my colleagues can give.
This is, I think, a really common problem that I see a lot with a lot of my clients is, well, how do I help this other person? And I think that we have to acknowledge, first and foremost, that watching the suffering of others is incredibly difficult. And that in and of itself is like a secondary trauma. To be able to just, I tell them it's like watching a car crash. You're just watching it. And what we have to acknowledge is that we're not in the car. We're not behind the driver's seat. And you're in your car. You can only drive your car. Don't get in the backseat of their car and try to tell them how to backseat drive either. Because when they crash, you're going to crash with them. So, and I'm of no use if I crash with somebody. In my job, my whole job is to witness suffering every day. If I were to do that, I would be of no use to anyone. So preserving yourself, making sure your car is, you take it to the mechanic, you've got the wheels checked, you have enough fuel. You have to take care of your car, and that's how you're also modeling for them how to take care of their car.
I'm going to be the timekeeper and remind us that we have 4 more minutes.
I'd like to share with the gentleman who just spoke that there's a lot of research on who the happiest couples are and why. And one of the big findings is that the happiest couples, when they have a problem, they go to each other and no one else, not their friends, not their family. Now, I'm not talking about people in abuse situations, but I'm talking about, if you aren't in an abuse situation and you have something to work out. So one of the things, I guess, that you could do if you feel like you're out of your depth with something other than just listening is just saying, have you discussed this with your partner? Is there something that's stopping you from really listening to what your partner says about this and to working it out with them? Because a lot of times people go to their friends and they actually haven't worked it out first with the person that they love.
Yeah, I appreciate the strong humanistic existential perspective, and I acknowledge the tendency to view one's phenomenology as inviolable and beyond question. But there are other theoretical perspectives in psychology that I'm curious about, what you think about them. For example, in cognitive psychology nowadays, it's very fashionable to talk about how you can be wrong about even how you evaluate yourself. And I think this is very compatible with some of what the therapists are suggesting in this presentation. Things like the self-serving bias, for example, and the representativeness heuristic come to mind. You can have cognitive distortions that affect your efforts to know yourself. And that's very compatible with the psychodynamic perspective. Even the neo-Freudians would say that because of the defense mechanisms, you might be in denial, or you might be projecting your, true motives unconsciously onto others. You might be forming a reaction. So what do you think about the possibility that you could be wrong about your own self-knowledge or your own attempts to acquire self-knowledge?
Well, I guess since I'm the one who told people to believe people when they told them about themselves, maybe I should respond to that first. So yeah, there's always the possibility that we're wrong. Sure. About lots of things. And when we're approaching other people, starting from a place of believing them allows us to connect. And, ultimately, I think a lot about maintaining peace in relationships is about connection. So if we start from a place of, are you really that? Do you really believe that? That's not ultimately going to connect us. So even if a person is wrong about who they are, I still want to start with connection. And even there, sometimes there are terrible people who I don't want to connect with. So I can say that, right? But at the end of the day, am I going to be that person out there at that, rally of people who very much, have a stated bigotry towards my identity, trying to connect with people? I'm not. So yeah, there's always context. And yet, if we're building connection, which I do pretty firmly believe, I would be surprised if I was wrong about connection being the most ultimate peacekeeping approach, then everything else is a bit secondary.
Just one quick add. I'd rather have us talk about the way our self-assessment is incomplete rather than it's wrong. We don't want to be in a spot in which we're continually saying to folks or ourselves, no, you're wrong about your self-assessment. No, go to something else. Go to something else. Try something else. I think incomplete is the human condition.
And then I also want to say that I think that urgency is one of our biggest problems. If we can all just have less urgency, I also think that would be a really big component of that. And I think that's part of that wrongness versus incompleteness is we don't actually have to be at an answer. There's no urgent need to have a complete right or wrong.
I know we're short on time, but I'll just say that I don't think it's a binary or a zero sum where we have to use one approach or the other. I think we have to use all approaches. So everything that you said, talking about projection or, is somebody's perspective inaccurate or incomplete, or is it offensive to the other person or not in line with their authenticity? These are all things that we would be addressing. So it doesn't have to be addressed just by humanistic psychology.
That's a great note to conclude this particular panel on. Thank you so much, all of you, for your valuable insights